Good afternoon, guys. I hope you're doing well this week. Over the course of the week, have been kind of taking some time looking at sort of the chronology of the Passion Week. Kind of looking at the timeline and studying the timeline between the triumphant entry, Palm Sunday, and Easter Sunday. And so I think kind of throughout the week, I'm going to be giving some little updates on what was happening on this day then. And so I wanted to share a little bit about Tuesday in the Passion Week. Tuesday was a very busy day. On Tuesday, it appears that Jesus he spent most of his time teaching. And so we have much of Matthew chapter 21, chapter 22, chapter 23, chapter 24, chapter 25, all the way up to the beginning of chapter 26. All takes place, it looks like, on this Tuesday in the Passion Week. And so that entails many of the parables in Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, right? There's quite a bit going on there. And I wanted to focus on one little portion of Matthew chapter 22. At this point, the religious leaders have just tried to trap Jesus with their famous tax question, should we pay taxes or not? You remember Jesus takes the coin, whose head's on it? Caesar's. He says, well, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. And so it's right after that. They're still kind of gathered around Jesus. They're trying to trap him. And that's where I want to look at verse 34 of Matthew chapter 22. But then the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, and they gathered together. One of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Jesus, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And this is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So you see the scene here. They've gathered around Jesus, trying to trick him, trying to catch him in a slip of words. And one of them, in an effort to test Jesus, they say, Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? You know, what's the one commandment in the whole of the law and the prophets that we should be following? What's the most important thing? And remember what Jesus tells him. He says, you must love the Lord your God. He says, that's it. You need to love the Lord your God. And he kind of gives some details. He says, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. You need to love God. And I think that that's important for us to realize that the most important thing that we can do in our Christian experience, the most important thing we can do in our Christian walk is to love God with everything that we are, with our mind, with our soul, right? All that we are needs to be involved in loving him. Our emotions, our intellect, our spirit. We need to be focused on recognizing him for who he is and exalting him and loving him. And secondly, he says you need to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's interesting because that's not always easy to do, is it? To love other people. You know, people are annoying sometimes. They're difficult. They buy up all the toilet paper so that we don't have anything, right? It's not always easy to love the people around us. And we know that our neighbor isn't just the person that lives next door to us. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, we learn that our neighbor is basically everybody, right? And the Lord says, Jesus says, you need to love everybody around you because we are created in the image of God. Our neighbors are created in the image of God. We're all image bearers of the Lord. And because we love God, we need to love those who are created in his image. So Jesus says, look, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord. The second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor. And he says, if you can do these two things, you'll keep the entire law of God. You'll keep the entirety of the law and the prophets, he says. And that's interesting. He doesn't say, look, here's a long list of rules that you need to keep. You need to keep all of the Levitical law. You need to make sure and not break any of the 10 Commandments. He says, look, if you do these two things, if you love God and love your neighbors, the rest of it will naturally happen. If you're loving God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, you're naturally not going to be worshiping idols. You're naturally not going to be taking the Lord's name in vain. You're naturally not going to be breaking the principles of the Sabbath. If you love your neighbor as yourself, you're naturally not going to be committing adultery or murder or stealing or coveting or any of those other things. You're naturally going to be obeying your parents. And so the idea is, it's not that we're ever going to be able to keep the whole of the law perfectly. But as long as we're loving God and loving people, we're on the right path, Jesus says. We're on the right trajectory. We're accomplishing the things that we need to accomplish. And so I just want to encourage you guys in that. To love God and to love people. And as you do that, as we do that, as we love God and love His people, He's going to begin to manifest Himself in us and through us. So that's your word of encouragement for this Tuesday in the Passion Week. Love God and love people. God bless.